Greetings everyone and welcome back. My name is Alfred, and in this video we are going to create and configure our application server. In the previous video we created one administrator user, and then we created a project and we connected that project to our local machine. So in this episode, we are going to create our application server. So what we are going to do, just like the way we created our dev GitLab server, the same way we are going to create our application server. So just go ahead and create your application server. I'm not going to do this on the screen, so I'll pause the video, create my application server, and then I'll come back to continue after I create my server. Please just go ahead and create your server, and if you face any challenges, just go ahead and refer to the previous episode where we were creating the dev GitLab server, and just tag along and see what could be the issue. All right, so I'm going to pause the video now and then continue, and I'll come back later when I've already created my own application server. All right, so I've managed to create my dev app server. Hope you've created your server successfully. Mine is now created, as you can see here, and it's running. And I've also added the local machine key to the server, to the authorized key, so that I can just SSH into it without requiring me to provide the password. All right, so I hope it's clear, and I hope you've already done that. All right, so what do we need to do on our app server? The first thing that we want to do is to install PHP. So we are going to install all the dependencies that we need on the servers that we can run the Laravel application on this server. All right, so the first thing that we would want to install is the PHP. If we were to get into PHP version, let's just go ahead and check if we have PHP installed here. So I'm gonna have PHP version. So let me just go ahead and say PHP version. And as you can see, we do not have PHP installed onto our server, right? So let's just go ahead and install PHP on the server. So what we are going to do, we are going to add some dependencies for our PHP environment. So just go ahead and paste that in. This is the dependencies that we need to install, so that we can just go ahead, get the PHP repository, and then continue to install the PHP itself, and then later we're going to install the PHP extensions. So I'm going to go ahead and should be sudo like that, and I've put my password, which is password. All right, and this should install the dependencies that we are going to be using. All right, so that's it installed. What I'm going to do now is to go ahead and fetch the repository here. I'm just going to clear my console. I'll go ahead and install the repository. All right, and that should go ahead and add the PHP repository. I'll be adding PHP 8.2. All right, and now the repository is added successfully. And what I can do, what I want to do, I would just go ahead and update. So I'll just go ahead sudo apt update, and that should update the repository. Let's just go ahead and see if it's updated successfully. And I'm going to just clear my screen, and then what I have to do next is to install now the PHP itself from that repository that we just ordered. And for some reason it could not be ordered, so it turns out that I had some pending updates. I just said sudo apt update, and that allowed me to continue installing the repository. And what I'm going to do next, now I'm going to try and install the PHP itself. And here now it's going to ask me if I want to continue. I'm going to type Y for yes, and that should continue installing the PHP 8.2. It's gonna take some time to install, but then within some few moments should be done already. All right, and PHP is installed. If I were to go ahead and try to check PHP version now, that should give us that we have PHP 8.2.9. All right, and that's one of the requirements installed successfully. Something that happens also is that you might notice that when we are installing the PHP also installed the Apache server. We'll not be using Apache server in this course. We'll be using Nginx. So what we are going to do next, we are going to install some of the extensions for Laravel and PHP in general. And this is how I'm going to install the extensions. So I'm going to just go ahead and try to install the extensions. And then after installing the extensions, what we are going to do, we are going to remove the Apache server that was installed by default when we were installing the PHP. All right, and the modules have been installed successfully. And what we are going to do now is we're going to remove the Apache. Then we'll continue to install the Nginx. So to remove Apache, we're going to use the purge command, and I'm going to say sudo apt, and then we're going to have the purge here. And what we are going to purge is Apache 2. Sudo apt, this should be Apache 2, and there should be no dash there, right? And it's going to ask us if we want to remove the Apache, and we're going to respond with yes. Right, and now the Apache 2 has been removed, And we can affirm this by going to the server, to DevOps server, and try to see if we're going to get any connection, and we're not getting. That's because the Apache is removed. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is to install the Nginx. All right, so before we install the Nginx, what we're supposed to do is just to update our files. So I'm going to have sudo apt update, and that should update our files before we go ahead and install the Nginx. Right, and that is Apache installed, removed from our system. And what we're going to do next now is to install the Nginx. So let's just go ahead and install the Nginx server instead of Apache. And it should be sudo install Nginx, and we're going to have yes there to install the Nginx. And that should install the Nginx successfully. All right, so what we can do to check if the Nginx was installed is to go ahead and try to reach out to the server again and see if you're going to get anything. And there we go. As you can see now, we have Nginx ready installed into our server. So that's for the server. So the next dependency that we're going to install onto our server will be the MySQL. So we're going to install MySQL on our server as well. But before we do that, what I want to do is just go ahead and install the Composer. Is a dependency manager for PHP, and we will be using Laravel for our application. So let's just go ahead and install the Composer. So I'm going to have sudo apt install then Composer, and that should install the Composer for us. So I'm going to have a yes response there. So let's go ahead and install the Composer for us. Right, and that is Composer installed. So the next thing that we're going to do is to install MySQL. All right, so let's just go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and say sudo apt, and I'm going to install MySQL server. So I'll go ahead and install MySQL server. This is, so I'm just going to have here install. It's going to ask me to confirm if I want to do that. I'm just going to say okay, and that should start installing the MySQL server on our system. All right, and that is MySQL installed successfully. One thing we might just go ahead and do, so this is optional for local development, we're going to secure our MySQL installation. And for us to do that, we're going to say sudo, it should be sudo, then we're going to have the MySQL secure installation, so that our installation is secure. But this is optional for local development. But if you're running server, or if you're running MySQL on a live server, then it's advisable that you go ahead and secure your MySQL installation. All right, so here I'm just going to say yes to continue, and I'm going to choose the 0 for low. You can just go ahead and choose whichever you want to choose here, the level of the password. So I'm going to choose 0 and go ahead, remove anonymous users, and I'm going to say yes. And then disallow root login remotely. Yes, I do not want people to log in remotely. And remove test databases and access to it. And I'm going to say yes. Reload privileges table now. I'm going to have here as yes. And now all the security measures for our MySQL installation have been put in place. All right, so the next thing to do is to create a user for our database and then create the database itself. If you can remember, when we had our repository, we created a user and then we created the project using the user who was created before. All right, so what we are going to do, we are going to first create a user, and then we are going to create a database, and we're going to give privileges to that user so that they can use the DB that we're going to create. All right, so for us to be able to create the user, we're going to have sudo MySQL so that we can log in using the root credentials here. All right, and here now we are inside the MySQL console. This is MySQL console and not the normal terminal. So let's go ahead and create user. So I'm going to say create user like that, and I already have a user on my clipboard. So I'm just going to paste in the username. So this is the user that I want to create user. Here you have the quotes, the name, then art, and then localhost. And this user is going to be identified by password. So let's just go ahead and press enter. And as you can see now, we already have a user created. All right, so after creating the user, what we're going to do, we're going to create our database that we're going to be using with our project. All right, and one thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to issue a command that creates a database for us. So I'm going to have create database, and the database that I'm going to be using, I'll call it liter ERP. All right, like that. Going to press enter on my keyboard, and that should now go ahead and create a database for us. Okay, so I'll continue, and I'm going to grant the privileges of this database that we've created to the user that we've created. All right, and for me to do that, I'm going to issue a command here. So I'm going to have here, and I'm going to say grant all privileges on liter ERP to the user that we created previously. So as you can see, I'm going to say grant all privileges, and that should be off liter ERP to Alfred at localhost. If you remember, this is the user that we created. And I should have some issues here. And as you might have noticed here, we should have on. So it's privileges on liter ERP to Alfred at localhost, and that should work. So after creating the user, then creating the database, and then giving the user privileges to these databases, what I can do for now, if I were to say show databases, this should print all the databases inside this schema. As you can see, we have information schema, we have Lita ERP, the new database that we created, then we have performance schema, and then we have the SIS. All right, so after doing that, what I want to do, I'll go ahead and exit the MySQL console. All right, now I'm out. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get again inside the MySQL console, but this time I want to use the user that we created. So I'll log in as the user that we created, and I'm going to get to the DB that we also created. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say sudo MySQL, but this time around I'll pass an argument, and this argument will be, the first argument will be user, and this is the username. So for the username, if you remember, we created Alfred. All right, and then another argument that we're going to pass is the password. So we're going to enter, and it's going to ask us for the password. If you remember, we created password just as password. All right, and as you can see now, we are logged into MySQL again, but this time around we are not using the root user, but we're using the user that we've just created. All right, so I'll go ahead and try to query the database query again, and we'll see what we're going to get. So I'll go ahead and say show databases. And as you can see now, this time around, we have only 3 databases shown to this user here, because he or she is not the root user. All right, as you can see now, we have the information schema, we have the Lita ERP, and we have performance schema. All right, and up to that point, we can say that we have just created our database. As you can see here, the other one shows us this one is an extra DB, and this one is an extra DB, which is not the case with the user that we've just created. All right, and up to this point, it means that we've installed most of the required things, or most of the required applications that we are going to be using in our project. So thank you very much for being with me on this one. I'll see you in the next video.